Welcome to Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, a podcast by Chefalo Consulting, where we share the knowledge, stories, and resources you need to create a trauma-informed culture that supports wellness, growth, and resilience. I'm your host, Shenandoah Chefalo. Welcome, everybody. So excited to bring another installment of our little podcast here. We hope that you've been enjoying it and following along to all of our episodes. As always, we want to encourage you to go back, listen to those episodes. There's some really great nuggets in there each time we do an episode. I have pages and pages of notes from all of our podcast guests that we've had so far. Just learning so much with them and about them. And I expect nothing different today. Today's episode, I'm really excited about because we're going to really get into this inside out piece and the inside out work of becoming human centered. And so on today's episode of Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, I am delighted to welcome Rick Ely, the CEO of C-Suite Charters, and a seasoned entrepreneur with a super diverse background spanning real estate, strategic investments, and now a luxury maritime experience. He doesn't know it yet, but I first thought I was going to be a marine biologist, so we're going to dive into all of that. With a career that reflects a series of bold transitions, Rick has mastered the art of blending passion with business acumen. A former chief engineer turned executive business coach and sport fishing enthusiast, Rick brings a unique perspective to both the boardroom and the open seas. Let's dive into Rick's story and uncover the wisdom he's gained from the high seas to high stakes business ventures. Rick, I'm delighted to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Well, aloha, Shen. Good to see you again.
Rick, tell us where you're coming from, because I live in the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes region, as most people know, where it's cold. What do you got going on where you are?
Well, I'm not on the yacht this morning. I'm actually in my living room office. So Florida, Port Canaveral, Florida, that's where we are today. It's warm and sunny.
Of course it is, right? Always sunny skies. Rick, I know that transitioning from strategic investments, which is, we could probably spend a whole episode on in itself, to luxury charter service is an interesting pivot that we don't hear all the time. Can you share something, a moment, an inspiration that led you to birth C-Suite Charters?
I've transitioned a lot. I've had to reinvent myself multiple times. I say I've been rich and I've been poor, but today I'm the happiest person that I know. I've always, you can take the man out of the sea, but you can't take the sea out of the man, human being, man, woman. It's in you. And I've always been drawn to the sea. And I think many people have. It's just a deep, the mystery of what's underneath, right? You had some history. You wanted to be a marine biologist. So there's a draw to the sea. I've always been a fisherman, and I've learned over time to come from the deepest place in my heart and really, what is it I want to experience? And so I move in the direction of what I want to experience, and that's pretty much it.
So tell us more about that, because I do think I'm with you on this sea, right? Probably most of my childhood, a lot of people, I've had a lot of coaches in my life, and they're like, Shen, what did 5-year-old Shen want to do when she grew up? And I was like, yeah, marine biology. It's easy for me. I was drawn to that for sure. I think, I grew up on the West Coast, but things happen in life that lead you away from it, right? Like things happen, advice is given. I remember very specifically being told, yeah, girls aren't really marine biologists. That's not a thing. And by the time I was kind of high school age, we were in Michigan, and people were like, yeah, that's just not a thing we do around here, right? Like that's not practical. What do you think happens? What happens as we kind of take this journey? Do you think that that splits us from that original draw that we have to whatever it might be. For some folks, it might not be the ocean. I know many people who are frightened of the ocean or have fears there, but it might be something else. What do you think gets in the way of that?
There's so much that they don't teach in school, and so much of it is programming that they program you to go get a job, make money. There's a certain program of life. It's don't really teach you how to get in touch with the deepest place of your heart. You might fill out some forms and say, oh yeah, this would be a good career path. This would be that. And originally I wanted to be an airline pilot. I'd always loved fishing. I can remember from the time I was little, I would ride my bike down to the San Diego River and I'd go fishing. That was my solace. That's where, I connected with myself, with nature. And having spent a ton of time on the water in between working on sport fishing boats, and I thought I would make my way and pay for college to become an airline pilot by going to Alaska and going crab fishing. That's how I was going to pay for college. And so originally I wanted to be an airline pilot. I didn't think about connecting with my passion for water, for the ocean.
Yeah. It's that disconnect, right? So this is one of the things that I want to so can you maybe walk us through that transition for you? Because so here you are, you're interested in becoming a pilot. You're thinking about doing the pilot thing by being on a crab fishing boat. I think we've all watched that reality series once or twice, right? But what happened? How did you go from the crab fishing boat to real estate to strategic investment to back to wait, the boat was really the place. In this case, not Alaska, Florida, which I might add seems like a smarter choice. But what was that? Can you just walk us through that transition and maybe some of the things you liked or didn't like about what you were seeing in those industries as well?
I wish it were that simple, but the truth is while I was enrolled at Big Bend, my dad had actually been shot. And so I got a phone call at about 5 o'clock in the morning from my mother. And she said, well, your dad's in a critical condition. I don't know, if he's going to make it. He wouldn't want me to call you. And so I sold what possessions I had to my roommate and jumped on a flight and took care of my parents for about a year. And when it was all, when my dad was back on his feet and my mom, they were healthy, well, and back, to living, I'm like, man, what the heck am I going to do? And so I went back home to where I grew up. I didn't go back to Washington. I went back home to where I grew up. Figured, okay, what am I going to do? And I found myself walking on G Street Pier in San Diego and walking the docks. And I come across a guy named Bernie Blocker, the Cimarron. And the Cimarron was an 80-foot bait boat. They fished tuna. All the crew were Hispanic or Portuguese. And I got to chatting with him, and I said, well, give me half a chance. I'll be your best man by the end of the year. And sure enough, I was a chief engineer before I got off that boat. But I started out as a greenhorn on a commercial tuna boat, and then made my way to Alaska and lots of adventures for about 10 years, became a chief engineer. And along the way, while I was traveling on tugboats in Washington, I met my wife. And, love changes everything.
Doesn't it? Isn't that the statement of the century right there?
Yeah. I had it pretty cushy. I mean, I was at 30 years old. I was making a couple $100,000 a year, working 6 months out of the year, growing a rose garden. And I can remember 9/11 hitting. We bought our first house, and I was making a transition. And I'm like, what am I going to do? I'd always wanted to be a real estate investor. I never wanted to be a real estate broker. I had this in the back of my head. It was like cheesy car salesman. I didn't want to be associated like that. But that was where I cut my teeth in real estate. I spent 20 years in real estate. By the time I was done, I'd owned a real estate brokerage and a development company and an investment firm. Been a hard money lender with my own money, and transition. Talk about transition. That was an interesting transition.
Because I'm just so fascinated. I get to talk to so many fascinating people, of course you among them, about sometimes timing, even when it might be perceived as a negative event, right? Your father being shot, for example. I mean, nothing positive about that. I think we can all agree there. But the timing of that and how that switches you to do something else, right? Like I'm just always so in awe of like we sometimes have this idea of something we want to do. I'll try to be more articulate with this, but we have this idea of something we want to do, but something happens, even a perceived negative. Someone gets ill or injured, something like this. Maybe we lose a job, we get divorced, all of these like changes that can have perceived negative. But also sometimes the timing of it puts us maybe on the path we were meant to be. And just even as I'm listening to your story, I'm just like, gosh, yeah, these are like really hard things. I'm listening to you. Even the positive of like, hey, finding your wife, which is this really good thing. But yet it causes this transition, which seems almost like what you were destined to do in the first place, right?
Destiny. It's a good topic. I mean, is it preordained? Have you been here before? What's the key to this? And as I reflect and I look back, where were my thoughts? Where were my feelings in those time frames? And then what was the next picture? What came out of it? I'd always had this. When I met my wife, of course, she had values and morals that I couldn't even comprehend, and so knowing her made me want to be a better man. And that's an interesting concept, because I at that point, you think, oh, am I worthy of this? Am I worthy of this love, this unconditional love? Here I was. We courted for a year and a half, and she. There was a moment in time she'd asked me all of these questions, and for the first time in my life, I think I was actually honest. I was honest with answering these questions. I didn't have anything to lose. I wasn't looking for anything in the moment. And hear this. I mean, I can remember the first day I saw her. The first moment I saw her, she was out of my league. And so what did I have to lose? I shared my, I bore my soul. And she
Mm.
still wanted to be around me. It was like she still wanted, it was like, you know,
Still
well,
hanging around. Yeah.
yeah, after 25 years, we've been married 25 years and we have three amazing adopted children that I always say we could have never bred that well. But, I asked her to marry me this morning and she said yes. So it's intentions. I think your intentions will always follow you. So whatever direction you're pointed, whatever you're thinking and how you're feeling, I believe creates the next picture in your reality. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah, you said something to me before that I actually wrote down and I've been kind of gnawing on since you said it, which was perception is projection.
Yeah, I just finished writing that book. Perception is Projection, a philosopher's inspiration. It's hard to imagine. In today's world, I think we want to blame other people or circumstances or things that we think are outside of our control. But the one thing that we can control is actually our perception. And when we view life as for us, rather than as against us. Who told me the deck was stacked against me? I'll never forget a moment. And this is looking back, I can see these things. Hindsight's always 2020. And I can remember I was at the peak of my game. I had this net worth, high net worth, wearing a three-piece suit, and I'm moderating at this conference, and I'm coming off of the podium, and this guy, Ed Ruskowski, who's an older gentleman, I'm walking to my seat, and he grabs me by the sleeve, and he says, Rick. And so I got down on my knee, and I said, hey, Ed, how you doing? What can I do for you? He goes, you know why you're so successful? I said, no, Ed. I said, do you have some idea? What is it you think? And he says, well, nobody told you you could fail. And in that moment, I had not thought about failure. There was a seed that was planted and deeply rooted, and it took root. And I began, man, what would it look like if I failed? Oh my Lord. I went
something you never considered before.
Nope, I hadn't. I'm literally at the top of my game, and I had my identity wrapped up in all of these things that I had achieved and that I could do, and this identity of who I was. And in that moment, it was like, well, what, could you fail? And there was a whole long journey out from there, but
I'm so fascinated by that, Rick. Because first, thanks for your vulnerability with that, because I think that takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability. And what's so fascinating, of course, to me is like I can only understand and relate to you through my own experiences and my own piece of me, right? And so I hear you say that. What's so fascinating to me, being on this side of my own personal development journey, is I had been told so many times that I would fail, right? Like I can think some of my very earliest memories are about how you're not good enough, how you won't do that it never occurred to me that I could succeed, right? So almost this complete opposite trend of you. This is what's so fascinating to me about the world. And yet, when I went on my quest to say, and I say this quite often, that the reason I ended up doing this work is somebody turned me on to self-help books around the law of attraction, right? The Secret, The Power of Now, like all of those things, which are incredible. I have nothing against all of those. But when I was on my own journey, what happened is they kept saying, have these positive thoughts, right? And I was like, what is so wrong with me? I'm such a failure. And this gets to that seed piece, right? I'm such a failure. I can't even have a positive thought. This was literally what was going through my mind on my beginning of my personal journey. Like, who exists on this planet that's having all of these positive thoughts? Like as people were like, hey, have you tried this book? What about this book? And I was just like, I don't get it. I was really just like, who's having all of these positive thoughts? And then I got turned into some neuroscience stuff, and you and I've talked about this, adverse childhood experiences, and I started realizing, oh, wait a second, there's something else here at play. So for you as someone who, this idea of like, hey, no one's ever told you could fail, and that word fail coming into your vocabulary almost for the first time, I would say, me on this opposite end saying, wait, there's a different way to be, but yet you and I converging, because when I hear you saying that, like the only thing we can control is our perception, for me, and the thing that I talk to my listeners all about is this reenactment, right? You can be a victim, you can be a rescuer, you can be a persecutor, but our real goal is how do we move ourselves from victim to driver, which is what I hear you saying, rescuer, me trying to fix it for everybody else, to just supporter, how do I support everyone else? Or how do I move from persecutor, the telling, which by the way, Rick turned me onto a really good book we're going to talk about in a second, the how do I tell, the persecutor, to how do I coach, how do I ask, how do I become more curious? And so I just hear you talking about when did that enter, but confronting that piece that enters in, right? No matter when on this journey of yours it enters, I think we all have to face it at some point.
I don't know that was the beginning of that chapter, right? There's plenty of programming all along the way. And so is it deep? It's me. It's inside me. It's always an inside job. And I can look back on my history, and even as a child, like I wasn't supposed to be. And I wasn't, I went to plenty of special schools, and I was always told I wasn't, good enough. But my dad would tell me, you're going to be a great man one day. And so that was a program. It didn't seem right. I couldn't understand. There's this giant conflict internally because my parents would send me to boarding schools, foster homes, and I experienced plenty of trauma. But my dad's words, I'll never forget. He'd always say, "You're going to be a great man one day," And I love you. I mean, I can remember sitting on the floor in my grandma's home, sharing something that had deeply traumatized me, and here I am, this kid, this 10-year-old kid, 11-year-old kid, sitting on the floor, telling my parents that this happened at this foster home, and my dad, I'll never forget his words. I thought something like that might have happened, and I'm like, son of a gun, man! If you thought for a moment that something bad was happening, why didn't you pull me out? Why didn't you take care of me? Why didn't you protect me? And so I think that there's plenty of baggage. We all carry our baggage, but if I recognize that everybody's doing the best they can with what they have in the moment, is for me, it's not against me. But this ideology of being a victim, I didn't learn until much later in life. I carried around a lot of baggage. And I think that next chapter is what really helped me to identify it and to resolve it. And by resolving it, I had to be okay with me. I mean, I had to experience, go through addiction. I had to go through all of this identity. Like, who am I? I didn't really love me. Who could love me?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Listen, Rick, I mean, it resonates with me, right? Like, foster kid to foster, like, I remember, like, if my own parents can't love me, who can? Right? Like, because that's supposed to be the guaranteed peace, right? Like, that is when we talk about family. And listen, whether that's your blood family, your chosen family, your adopted, like, whatever that means to you. I've got a very loose definition of family when I say that. But I remember struggling for decades. I clearly am not worthy of love by anybody else, because I couldn't even get it from the most guaranteed people, right? Like, I definitely did not feel loved by my parents as a child. I did not feel loved by my mother. That's a real thing. And I think it's why I resonated with your story about your wife, about, like, am I worthy of this relationship so much? Because I had a similar thing with my spouse. And I think that's so fascinating that we've both been married for so long, because I remember intentionally doing things to push that person away. Like, I would, like, and I know I was intentionally doing it. I knew I was intentionally doing it then. This isn't like some aha moment I've had later in life. It's like, I was intentionally seeing, like, what bad behavior can I do to make you want to go a different direction? Because I want you to choose somebody else. I almost was seeking out that rejection, right? That piece of, like, I want to prove. I wanted to be trapped in that victim mindset so much that I was doing behaviors to prove that I could only be a victim. And it was really that. It's why I wanted to have you on the show. And I've been so excited to have you on the show. Is that inside out piece is tougher than we talk about. But you said something to me, which was, I just want to be genuinely curious. And the genuine piece of that was what really, because I think a lot of people go around saying they want to be curious. I say it, but the genuinely curious to me your use and intent of using that word. It's something I've been thinking about for the last little bit since our last conversation, Rick, about what does that mean with you? Like that genuine curiosity as you think about just yourself, your perception, your projection of yourself, but even, I mean, listen, you coach a lot of people, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, you're taking people out on the boat who are overcoming experiences. What does that mean to you, that genuine curiosity?
If I'm honest with myself, I'm probably the most selfish person that I know because I genuinely care about how I feel. And to come to a place where I can connect with other people, it can't be about me. And that means that I have to be in relationship. Well, how can I be in relationship if I don't know or if I'm not curious? And if it's all about me, and what's the point of the relationship? You've provided me an incredible reflection. And I'm greatly appreciative of your sharing. It's not easy, but it doesn't have to be hard. And I think that challenges are inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And the moment that we can get to a place where we can actually identify our deepest fears, because like you had said, you were going to manifest this split. Why am I worthy? I'm going to push this away. And I mean, I can only come from my own experience in reference to that, but I was doing the same thing. I was self-destructing my life. I was blowing this thing up. And I didn't know how not to, because that was my strategy. And we have a strategy for everything. We got a strategy for how we brush our teeth. We got a strategy for how we navigate tough conversations. We got a strategy for our life. And my strategy happened to be blowing things up, because my deepest fear was that everybody that I loved would leave me. Everybody that I loved would leave me. And so I pictured my wife leaving me one day. I pictured my family leaving me one day. I didn't feel this worthy. And until I could get to a place where, you know what, I am worthy. Who am I? And so the I am, when you come to, well, who are you really? In this process of my own personal development, I went from nothing to something to, if you'd sneezed, it would blow everything I thought I was off the palm of your hand, because it was just, it was my perception. It was my perception of all of these things that I held in my own mind about, who am I? And I'll never forget the day. I mean, I went from 20 million to negative 10 when the market crashed. And I was like, I mean, not just broke, but I was $10 million underwater. And I used maritime analogies. I started bailing instead of fishing. I quit fishing. I stopped thinking about my dreams. I stopped thinking about what it was I wanted to experience. All I could do was focus on bailing the water out of the boat. How am I not going to sink this boat? And my mindset was just on bailing the water. And until I could figure out, okay, well, who am I? I'll never forget the day I'm walking a piece of property, looking at a potential subdivision land, and the guy that was selling the land asked me, well, who are you? Who are you? And I'm like, what the hell? Who am I? What do you mean? Who are you? Who am I? Who am I? And I think that changed the trajectory of where I was in that moment. And it took me a long time. Time it's relative, but it's all we have really is right now. All you have is this moment in time. And so getting to this place in time where I'm really comfortable being uncomfortable, I'm okay being me. I'm happy in my own shoes, and I can be honest with myself. I can create my world, and it can be beautiful because I truly believe it's for me. It's not against me.
That's the piece. So listen, you said this thing, if it's not a chapter in your book, Rick, it has to. It's not easy, but it doesn't have to be hard, which I think should be the title of this episode. I say to my producers as they're listening in on us, but that's the thing. This, both of us work in systems, executives, business people, coaching, right? And those people come to us and they're like, how can we make things better? How can we make things better for our customers? How can we make things better for our staff? And I think you and I agree on this, and maybe we don't, but I think we do, maybe from two different lenses, which is, listen, your customers are great. This is inside out work. Like, we have to be good to be good for others, right? We only give to others what we're overflowing with. In this idea of just being comfortable in the uncomfortable, you've said it, I've said it a lot of times, which is like, I'm not even sure I ever feel uncomfortable anymore. Because I almost relish when somebody's questioning me, or like, it makes me stop and be more intentional and think more deeply about that, and ponder it, like, because none of these answers, listen, there's not some easy pill you're going to swallow and then all of a sudden you have enlightenment. There's not an experience that's going to guarantee you shift your thought process. It's, to me, it's just this idea of being intentional. And I loved that you said, I'm the most selfish person I know. I'm going to challenge you. I think we should world record this. Maybe I'm the most selfish person, like, because that piece is, you have to be really selfish so you can then be curious about other people, don't you?
Well, if you know that it's an inside job, that the world is a reflection of you, who do you want to be? Do you want to be Jesus? Do you want to be the victim? Do you want to be who is it you really want to be? And that's the question, because and I almost think it's impossible for people not to be authentic, because even when they're faking something, right? Even when they're faking, there's still a part of their identity. They might not be aware, but somebody else may be aware, right? And so I believe that I'm always at cause. So 100% cause. There's the idea that it's all random, to me, doesn't equate, because there are too many examples in my own life that shed light on this truth for me when I'm paying attention, and I can see how it evolves the moment that I take responsibility and say, okay, what's my part in this? What am I choosing to see? At the point that I had come very, very clear with what it is that I value, and I think can be very, very helpful for people if they can identify what it is that they truly value. They can distill it and create a purpose, or identify their purpose, and cultivate a vision for their life. They can pretty much have anything you want. It can just never be at the expense of another. And the moment that we get what we are in life, and so when we're putting it out into the universe, into the world, and we're coming with emotional baggage that's something less than love, and I think that you can take the words love and acceptance interchangeably, because the moment that you can accept something as being a truth, being a reality, and say, oh, okay, I can see this perception, I can accept this person's perception of me. It doesn't mean that it has to be my perception of me, but it's a reflection. It's a perception. It's maybe somebody else's perception. That's okay. What does it mean to me? Because we're the ones that are giving it the meaning. The moment that we say it's good or it's bad, right? We're the ones defining the experience.
Do you think, Rick, for the folks listening, and one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on is, well, while the name of the podcast is Mindful Management, we're talking about the business world and the systems piece. For me, it's always been about us, right? Like it's I'm always the problem. I'm always like, it's always about me, and it's always about you, and it's always about, right, insert the person here. But you said something is, for people listening and who are like, man, I don't know, that seems like a lot of work, Rick. That seems, I don't know if I want to, that's a lot of heavy lifting. Do you think values, like if we just said, like, where do you start this work? For me, values resonates. As soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Like, are they your values? Are they someone else's values that you've inherited? Like, do you think that's a good first place for people to start?
I think it's the only place to start. I think that, once you identify what you value and really are honest with yourself and say, well, where did this come from? Whose idea was this? Because whether you're the program, it's a program. It's a program. Well, the moment that you can accept that you don't beat your own heart, that you don't breathe for yourself, this body is doing these things for you. 95% of the operating system is on autopilot, and it's a program running. And you can change the program. You can rewrite the program. But you have to understand and bring into balance, the mind, the body, the spirit. So there's a whole human being here. And it's not just the mind. It's not just, the spirit. It's not just the body. But even to the extent that our bodies, we don't even have to be sick. Like, you don't have, dis-ease is just that. Your body's not in homeostasis. You're not at ease. And so the body will try to share with you, hey, something's out of balance here. Something's not right. There's some deep-seated baggage that's just gotta go. It's not helping. And I'm going to help you to see this. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be hard at the point where the hard stuff is getting to a place where you can accept that it just is.
Gosh, I appreciate, I was just reflecting as I was listening to you about, like, when was the last time I was sick? Like cold, flu, right? Something as simple as that. And it's been a minute, if I'm honest with you, Rick. It's been a minute. I actually, I say this, I somehow have been a lucky person. Like, I haven't had COVID. Like, it's been a minute since I've been sick. And I was thinking, when was the last time I was, just as I was listening to you say that, right? And it's interesting because it was at a really tough transition where, like, I knew I wasn't in the place I was supposed to be, but I was doing it because I thought I had to. And for purposes of this call, we don't have to get into the why I thought I had to, but because we could spend an hour analyzing that whole piece, trust me. But it's so interesting to hear you sit, like, totally not at ease, right? Like, and that last time I was sick, it's like, God, yeah, just listening to you say that, Rick, just thinking about, like, my own perception of, like, that sickness actually, when I started feeling better, and I was sick for a couple of weeks there, I remember thinking, yeah, life's too short. I gotta make a change. And to your point, it's almost my body just saying, like, hey, dummy, this isn't working, Shen, you're not paying attention. And we've tried sending you other signals and you're not picking up on them. So we're just gonna make you lay in this bed for a couple of weeks, and then maybe you'll get the message. And I think that's so powerful, to your point of, like, how do we view that? And how do we use that to turn it around for ourselves, right? To think about, is this in line with where I'm supposed to be? And so as I think about that, I'm just wondering, like, I could have this conversation with you all day, but what I'm guessing some of my listeners might be thinking is, like, yeah. How does that just show up in my day-to-day life? Like, what are the traits in myself I need to cultivate? What are, like, I just keep going back to what we hear from a lot of, like, prominent business influencers who, I can choke down in small doses sometimes, but, like, what do you think of that? Like, are there key traits that make us more apt to want to work on that inside work, to look at our own personal values, to do that hard digging in us, Rick? Is it something else, do you suppose?
Kind of goes back to the autopilot program of like what are our dominant thoughts? What are and if you how you think and how you feel creates your reality. What is it you really want to think about? What is it you really want to feel? And the intense emotion and the thought creates the next picture. So getting to a place of neutrality, of really being neutral and saying, okay, well, what is it I really want to experience, where I'm not being, pushed by fear or pulled so heavily by even desire. But in a place of neutrality, it was like, okay, well, who am I? What is it I really want to experience? And then how would I feel as if that were a reality? What would I feel? And moving in this place, it's deep work. I mean, but if you want to coast through life, I mean, plenty of people just coasting, just cruising, just doing their thing, do their 8 to 5, 9 to 5, whatever it is, and never really, working for a paycheck and never really, living a dream. Maybe but that is their dream, right? That is their dream. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no judgment. I just happen to be a person that has a beautiful imagination, if you will. I think that I can have these incredible experiences in life and deep, meaningful conversations and connections that shape the future. But all there really is right now. And so I say, okay, well, what is it I really want to experience? I'm grateful for the opportunity to share time, because time is the most precious gift that you can give another human being. And so when I say I'm selfish, it's like, yeah, I'm really, really super selfish with my time. I know what it is I want to experience in life. And the value that I place on that is, well, it reflects in my world. It's like key people, the core. For me, family's everything. And so my wife, my children, that's my core. And that's where, for me, that has to be that's the center, because that's how I've identified me. For somebody else, it may be something completely different. They may experience joy and happiness or peace or neutrality in other ways. For me, it's family.
And that to me is like the values leading into now your boundaries, right? Like when I hear you say that, it's because I think such a big piece is learning how to say, whether in English or Spanish, that fretful word of no. Like no can be a real signal of love, I think. And sometimes like, no, I don't have the capacity. No, I can't show up to that thing. No, I can't. Like, right? The boundaries around that. And I think that gets really fuzzy, for at least it was for me. And I'm going to speak from I statements here, because maybe that's not the case for everybody. But for me, when I didn't know my values, it was hard to hold boundaries. But once I really committed to my values, the boundaries became really easy. Like, no, I'm not. And I say this because there are family members in which I don't have the best relationship with. And I struggled for a long time because I was set on this idea of like, hey, when I get married, I'll have a big family, because I had always wanted a big family as a kid in foster care. And when that didn't transpire, when, my in-laws weren't as welcoming as I wanted them to be, like, or as I had perceived that they should be, it became quite contentious for me of like trying, right? Like I was trying to get this thing that I couldn't. And when I really stepped back and looked at my own personal values, the boundaries of the behavior I was willing to accept from them changed greatly. When I really looked at my boundaries and I said, wait, I'm not going to be treated in that manner, right? Like I'm going to have just because there's this thing that I want, the thing that I want isn't going to change, but I'm going to get it in some different ways than this maybe traditional way that I had been holding on to from childhood. And so for me, when I hear you say that about like, No, no, my wife, my kids, what I hear you saying, Rick, and please correct me, isn't is like I'm willing to set some boundaries around who's going to influence that time I get to spend with them and what that looks like.
It's all choice. Everything is choice. So yeah, you have to have healthy boundaries. If you don't have a healthy boundary system, it's because you're okay. I'll give you a little secret. This is what's worked for me. Having identified my values, number one, come from the deepest place in my heart. And number two, I'm going to be my most authentic self. And the third value is integrity. It's my yes be yes and my no be no. And the fourth value is really happiness, right? And I can look the moment that I'm not happy, the moment that I'm something, less than neutral, is the place where I have violated a value. And so it's really easy to see if I'm paying attention to how it is I feel in the moment. It's like, okay, I'll just give you an example. Somebody's passed away, right? Somebody's no longer here. Now I'm grieving. Okay. I'm grieving. The moment that I just, yeah, put on a fake face and say, everything's going to be okay. And I haven't grieved. I'm violating a value, right? Number one, I'm not being authentic. And the value, the hierarchy of values, if you will, happiness is fourth in line. So what I've violated are these other three below it. I didn't come from the deepest place of my heart. I wasn't authentic, and I'm not having integrity. And so that has to be resolved. I can allow myself to grieve. I can allow myself to feel fully what it is I'm experiencing, process it, and then move into a place of, okay, back to neutral. But it's a process. You feel, I think going back to curiosity, it's like you have a feeling. And the moment that you have a feeling, you go, well, that's curious. That's interesting. Why am I feeling this way? The meaning behind the feeling is the meaning that we've given it. And we've identified it as something either good or something bad, but we're the identifier. You're the one that's so you go, oh, okay.
Name it, tame it, right, Rick? Like you got to identify the feeling first is what I hear you saying.
It's being authentic. I just spent yesterday, I literally spent hours deleting thousands and thousands of hours of video that I had in my own journey. But it was my project. Sometimes you have to take out the trash, right? You go, okay, this no longer serves me anymore. But it was great for identifying the state in which I occupied. But we're not, states are fixed, right? Like Florida, Michigan, these are fixed state. But we're traveling, right? And we travel through state to state. We don't have to remain in the state. So the state of grief or the state of anger or the state of, you name it, right? It's a state that we're occupying, but we're not fixed. And you can change the state and you can move. And you can learn to move easily and effortlessly from state to state once you identify what it is that you value and get to a place where you're not, look, we're human beings, right? I say we're spiritual beings having a human experience, but but we're human and we have these experiences. We feel deep emotion and they're not bad. But they're indicators. They're indicators of what we've identified as good or bad based on our perception and the meaning, the underlying belief that we have about something. What does that mean about me?
Okay, listen for our listeners. If you don't have as many notes as I have with one line quotes from Rick, you need to go back and re-listen to this episode because there are things, Rick, I want you to know that I'm going to be gnawing on long after this podcast is recorded and aired, and everybody else gets to dive in and listen too. Because I think I don't think there is real meat in what you're saying if we're willing to hear you on what you're doing. And I for one, appreciate one, your vulnerability, two, you showing up as your authentic self and full integrity today, and three, just the boundless amount that you're giving me to think like, oh, okay, what is that for me? Right? Like, okay, that's whew, that's reflecting something back that I know I need to think about post this show, by the way. So first, I just want to say thank you for that gift to me. I appreciate it immensely. I want to transition and ask you our quick fire questions because we're getting to the end, even though what my brain is begging me is to ask you like 7 more questions so we can all garner more wisdom from you. But before I ask you our quick fire questions, just for our listeners who our listeners like by and far are all kinds of people living in all kinds of communities and parts of the world and on different trajectories and doing things. But what I just know about people is that we all have a little more work to do. Like regardless of where you are in your journey, not starting the journey, just starting the journey, deep, deep, deep within the journey. Do you have maybe one like piece of advice, one piece of wisdom? Maybe it's an unexpected lesson that you learned along the way, a pitfall maybe you learned that you'd like to encourage others to avoid. Is there anything you want to share with our listeners who might be somewhere along the course of figuring out what's next for them? You're a guy who knows transitions well.
Whew. I think when you come from the deepest place in your heart, you can't get it wrong. So getting in touch with, with your heart center, to trust that it's for you. You give me 30 seconds with another human being, and I can tell you what their view of God or the universe or whatever it is all about. And that's because we treat others the way that we believe that God or whatever it is you believe is the character and the nature of that. So if we think that, that God is a tyrannical God, and if we make a mistake, he's going to spank us and put us out in the shed, whatever it is, that's how we're going to treat people. So, but if you believe that it is for you and that it loves you unconditionally, then I think you're going to see a whole nother lens. It is that perception of how we view life. We view life through this lens of perception. There's billions of people in the world. No two have the same perception. No two have had the same experiences. So to get to a place where you getting out of the victim mindset into understanding that you are a powerful, powerful creator, that you create your own reality, you create your world, you create the next picture. To do that, you have to let go of being a victim, because you can't take that with you. Everything, I think you got to dump the trash. You got to figure out, okay, what no longer serves you, and let it go. So learning to let go of stuff that doesn't serve you, that gets in the way of, sometimes this is, reprogramming our belief systems that we think that have served us and have kept us safe. And the truth is it has to this point. But all you have is right now. All you have is this moment in time to choose, who you want to be. what you want to experience.
And just because it served you once, is it still serving you now, right? That's the challenge I find in my own experience of saying, listen, the brain's doing everything it can to keep us alive. For you and I, it's done a good job. Here we both are today, right? But are those things that it learned, and to your point, pre-programmed itself, still serving me? Even though it served me to survive that one instance or that time and place that it did use it, serving me right now in this moment, in this interaction with you, I think is so powerful. Rick, I'm going to have you on again, only selfishly, so I can learn more from you. Do you mind if I ask you some silly questions? They're not silly.
Fire.
I think there's a lot of power in them, and I think it's helpful. It's helpful for me. So you turned me on. I'm going to steal part of this. You turned me on to a book called Humble Inquiry. When we chatted, I'm diving into it. I'm an avid highlighter user, so I haven't highlighted all my passages yet. But can you share with us maybe that book or another book or even a TV show, something that you're doing that's caught your attention, and maybe tell us why it's standing out for you?
Yeah, I think that book, Humble Inquiry, Edgar, what's his last name? It's in front of me. Edgar Schein, he was a professor at MIT. Fascinating, fascinating. And I think you come back to curiosity. It is like my purpose is to be the highest ideal of me in observation of the highest ideal of humanity. With that purpose in mind, I'm looking out into the world genuinely curious about the beauty, the talents, and of others. So it is I'm not looking, I'm going to find whatever it is I'm looking for. I'm going to manifest it in some way, shape, or form. It's going to show up for me. And so being genuinely curious, the main difference between the preacher, the teacher, and the one who's seeking is that the preacher or the teacher believes. They believe. They're coming from a place of solid belief. It's their belief, right? The one who's seeking is coming from a place of curiosity and saying, oh, okay, how does this work? The moment that I become my most authentic self and I say, okay, what is it I believe? Well, I don't really know what it is I believe about that. I'm genuinely curious. Well, what is it that you believe? And I can take that information objectively and digest it. Doesn't mean I have to make it my truth, but I can accept it as somebody else's truth. The difference between being curious and having to prove a point, the preacher or the teacher have got a distilled belief. They say, this is fact. This is why this is. It's true. It's their truth. It's 100% their truth.
I appreciate, yeah, you're right.
So that humble inquiry is, there's so much more to it, that the book itself, but just being able to relate to individuals from a state of curiosity as opposed to a place of judgment where, I mean, if you ask a question, right, just the tonality, like just the tone, is it really a question, or is it a statement of how you feel and believe that somebody else, well, you're going to manifest that based on your intentions, because I think that your intentions will always follow you. And so if genuine curiosity comes from a place of not predetermined judgment or predisposed idea of how that person is going to respond, but genuine curiosity says, why do you feel that way about that? Or how did you come to that? Not to propel your own idea. Genuinely curious about, like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. How did you get there?
So in the vein of that, if you could have dinner, I'm so curious, like, that who you would seek out as kind of your preacher teacher type, because you're such a seeker. So if you could have dinner with any historical figure, contemporary leader, who would you choose? But even for me, what's the one question you would want to ask them?
I struggled with this question.
It's a tough one. All of our guests have a tough time with it.
So we lived on Maui. We lived up in Kula. We lived up in Kula and near Oprah Winfrey's estate in Kula. And I'd walk on her wall, looking down into the valley. And she'd bought hundreds and hundreds of acres down off of Maui. I've always been an admirer from the fact that to somebody that has accomplished so much and asked so many questions and has been exposed to so many different types of people. And yet, you got this idea of what this personality is. And so to genuinely experience it for myself, what question would come up? I don't know. To be in the presence of another human being and to say, what is your perspective after having interviewed so many people in the world and having had so much time to reflect? What is truly your perspective now that you've seen all of this reflection?
These are supposed to be our quick fire questions, right? But your answer surprised me so much. It's so thought provoking for me because it's also an individual who has walked her personal journey so publicly facing, right? Like she had a big transition. If we just talk about the Oprah Winfrey show, from, to your point, when she was interviewing and kind of doing all of those shows, and then at some point she went through some transition on that show to where it really became a personal reflection and almost her publicly walking that personal journey of looking at some values, looking at some of those things that we've highlighted. So such an interesting choice, Rick. I'm so fascinated by your choice. So we know that you're an avid sport fisherman. You love the ocean. Maybe besides that, what's the hobby or activity that really just fills you with joy?
I love writing. I've always been a writer. I've always been a poet. The moments of deep reflection, being offshore. So what I've managed to do in this life now is kind of dovetail all of my passions, and I can honestly say that it feels really good to be me, to be in this place where I'm like, I don't spend time where it doesn't fill my soul. So being able to come from a place where it's like from the deepest place in my heart, the time spent is well spent. It feeds my soul.
I love that. So you mentioned writing, you're a poet. We know you have a book coming. We kind of hinted at that. Do you have any idea when your book is coming out? I know our listeners will want to know.
It's a culmination of stories, about 79 short stories, and it doesn't read like a novel. They're, Rick's epiphanies.
We love it.
And,
we could all use a little more of Rick's epiphanies, I think.
And I think writing is something that is, it's deeply personal. And so I really bare my soul in my poetry. And there's perfection. What is that? Like the idea of being perfect or not failing, like you can't get it wrong when you come from the deepest place in your heart. And so being able to just be my most authentic self, write it down. It doesn't necessarily mean that I got to share it with everybody. Sometimes I can process it and go, oh, okay, this is what, but just from writing it down, it's helped me to resolve something that was a trigger that was holding me back. And the moment that you can get the hook out, right? And be okay, be neutral. So yeah, to answer your question, writing, I love to write, and I see myself in the future, being writing continuously as I take this journey.
How can our listeners find you? Give them all the details. What's the best social media platform? What's websites, all the ways in which you prefer them to stalk you down and reach out?
Well, the best way to actually spend time and meaningful time is out on a charter on the ocean. That's really it. It's there's more value in that charter than the cost of the charter. There's 100%. I promise
You know
you
it's
that.
on my list. I mean, the next time I'm in Florida, there's no doubt that I'm making an extra day to spend time with Rick out on the charter. Is there a practical way that they can get a hold of you to even book the charter, Rick?
Absolutely. C as in Charlie, Sweet Charters. csweetcharters.com. It's really simple. You can reach me at Rick at C-Suite Charters. It's interesting when you come up with a name for a business and you go, okay, well, what is it I want to experience? And the executive suite is kind of like my lifestyle. I like spending time with people that are, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Don't get me wrong. I like to learn from other people. I like to learn from other people's experiences. I get to share, my own experiences from time to time if they're genuinely curious. And a lot of times people ask me, how did you get there? But fishing, working offshore, going on a cruise, that's my passion. So yes, C-Suite Charters. If you want to just have a conversation or email, I'll have my book out here in the next within the next month or so. So it'll be
I love it. Maybe by the time this airs, we'll have Rick, we'll have all the links. So we'll want to tell our listeners just some of the practical pieces. We'll put links to Rick's website, all the things. If his book comes out in the next little bit, we'll be sure to also include a link to where you can purchase that. I'll be first in line for sure for that. Rick, I appreciate you so much. I appreciate your time so much. I know how valuable your time is to us. And again, just the vulnerability, and I want to take it, just showing up today as your authentic self. I appreciate it so much. You've taught me so much today. Thank you for being a guest, and I hope that you will consider joining us again in the future to share some more Rick-isms with us and some wisdom that you've learned along the way. Thank you for being here and for being a part of Mindful Management today.
Shen, it's a pleasure and an honor, and I look forward to spending more time with you. Like I said, it's the most precious gift you can give to another human being, and you've given graciously of your time. So thank you kindly, and I look forward to hearing from you in the near future.
I can't wait. Rick maybe said it best, more eloquently in our interview today. It's not easy, but it doesn't have to be hard. And I'll just add, right? We just take one step at a time. Pole pole. Thank you so much, everybody. Until next time. Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, CHEFALO, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. And remember, change happens one step at a time.